Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're delighted to welcome back a repeat offender, Charlie Self, also known as Dr. History. He's a regular guest on KSFO's radio morning show. He's a teacher, all sorts of good things going on in the world, and you're making an impact, Charlie. Welcome back.
It's really wonderful to be with you and wonderful to be sharing what's going on in the world for good, as well as some of the challenges that we face.
Well, and so for those of our guests who haven't been exposed to you previously, give us a little bit about your background and how you come today to where you are.
Well, I'm delighted to have been a pastor and a professor for 35 years, both working in the academy as well as serving parishes. Along the way, also had a chance to be in business, sometimes by default, sometimes by design, but in all cases, anxious to connect Sunday worship and Monday work, to help people live flourishing lives, whole lives, where they can bring their deepest values to what they do all day, and at the same time, those best practices should touch everything that we do. Right now, I'm a seminary professor. I teach church history, missions, discipleship, leadership at the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary, and my newest job, which I'm excited to announce, is that I'm the Director of City Development for a brand new network called Made To Flourish. We're helping to equip pastors with economic wisdom and understanding of what their congregants do all week in order that they might empower them further, and in turn that a healthy church might help the community to flourish. So it's just really fun to be able to kind of connect the dots and serve people in their missions.
But also, you're touching on all the facets of life, many of which we're not allowed to talk about in polite public, which we absolutely need to talk about in polite public.
Sure.
But bringing them in together in a way that can, as you said, make a positive impact on the communities that these individuals are involved in for the greater good.
Well, one of the things we need to really rediscover is what does the common good look like? And people of conscience. In fact, I decided to start a new movement called Thoughtful People of Conscience, because I think people of a variety of traditions, backgrounds, cultures can work together to help people flourish, to reach their potential. We ought to keep on debating. We can debate theology and morality and economic policies and political positions. Those are good things, and our founders want us to debate those with civility and respect. But there's so much we can do together if we can get a common vision of what human flourishing looks like.
And so, ideal scenario, talk to us a little bit about what human flourishing looks like to kind of set the base for the rest of the conversation we're going to have about things like politics and how those things can affect the communities that you're trying to help flourish right now.
Well, when we talk about a human being being healthy, we want that spiritual part of them to be alive. We want their emotional health to be sturdy and strong. We want their relationships to be well, both in their family, at work, among friends. We want them to have a sense of meaning and purpose. And then everyday work, we want it to be infused, we hope, with joy and with purpose, but even when it's a bit laborious and repetitive, we want people to see the value of the work that they do all day. So really what flourishing involves is both personal and community health that's discovered spiritually, emotionally, relationally, vocationally, we would say, in terms of a sense of purpose, and then everyday economics and work. Whether you're at home or in a factory, whether you're paid or unpaid, every day we need to wake up with meaning. And that takes individual initiative, but it also takes a community around you for it to happen.
Right. You didn't mention in those emotions fear and distress and all of the things that we're seeing manifest right now in the country.
And that's really one of our great challenges right now is getting to emotional health, both publicly as well as privately, and how we respond when things don't go our way.
Right. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to talk about tonight is, the ramifications of this election on people's mental health, on their emotions, on society as a whole. Will the world end? Will we get over it? Will we all be able to play nicely together at some point in the future? Or Are we throwing out all minorities in the country? What are we going to do?
Well, first of all, we need to remember in our wonderful American system that we don't elect messiahs.
Right.
And that elections are neither the apocalypse nor the second coming. They're not the end of the world, but they are decisive in kind of expressing both the aspirations and actualities that people feel. So part of what we're watching right now is some natural recoil of deep disappointment, of expectations not met. Part of what we're watching is paid and funded agitation. And a lot of what we're watching are people concerned that neither political party could field a better candidate, and that we actually find ourselves often feeling like we're voting by default, whether it's local, state, or federal. And so I think there's a great opportunity in this moment to kind of decide, what is a healthy political life look like?
Right. And I mean, historically, you understand how things have gone from the earlier parts of the country and everything else. Have there been times in our country's history where we've been as divided as many people think we are now? Actually, more divided. We have nasty political elections that are easy to recount, but probably if I were to give a parallel, I would give two. It would be the 1840s and 1850s, where every single ecclesial body, every single church divided over slavery, families divided over slavery. A nation went to war because we weren't living up to our founders' vision of true equality. And then if you want to fast forward another time, would be the late 60s, early 70s, where the civil consensus began to collapse. And so we're experiencing right now the consequences of what happened almost 50 years ago, as what everybody accepted as normal is no longer accepted as normal. So we are in a great opportunity to reaffirm some first principles, to re-articulate what you and I would say are the best of conservative values, but represent them to a group that doesn't know this history. And at the same time, we're at a perilous moment where if we don't find common consensus, then there's a lot of disintegration and dislocation that simply continues. Well, talk about in a little bit more detail what those first principles are that you see having the opportunity to be represented right now, because that might be a little vague for some. Well, our founders were brilliant, and they understood, especially in our Constitution and on our Bill of Rights, and you can add the Declaration, these founding documents. They aren't the Bible. They weren't given from heaven. They are the constructs of the best people can do at the moment. But what they did is they understood that people need the maximum amount of liberty possible, but rooted in virtue, and that government existed to protect God-given or natural rights, not bestow them, and that the federal government in particular should be the least amount of government in your life compared to state and local governments, but the greatest governance is your own, within your own family structure, your own religious tradition. This is why the first 16 words of the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights are so critical, and that those are the words that keep government out of religion, but allow people's deepest religious values to inform their private and public life. So there's just some examples of what our founders expected. That's why Ben Franklin's famous line is so important. We've given you a republic, madam, if you can have it. What he meant was, if you will take the responsibility of self-governance, of virtue, and be responsible for your family, be responsible as part of a religious community or not, but be responsible locally. And so this is the big change that's been happening in the last 100 years as well, as we've gone from much less local interest to a much more national and global interest. Well, and it's interesting. The question I would have for you is, are those concepts outdated? You've got people actually clamoring for larger government, clamoring for people to take care of them, versus being willing to take responsibility and, in fact, being much more quick to place blame as opposed to use the R word, responsibility. Yeah. Is that outdated? And how, given President-elect Trump's victory, how do you make the jump to people being able to go to a place of self-governance and religious freedoms? We have to build some bridges because we've become so polarized. We've said either you're compassionate, either you're a compassionate almost socialist, or you're a complete libertarian, either you're into personal responsibility or government help, and it's not that simple. I think we have to build some bridges. Words like empowerment,
opportunity, access to prosperity, property rights need to be joined with the common good, clean and decent infrastructure. So what's happened is the kind of assumed consensus of a combination of individual initiative and public good needs to be rebuilt, and it's going to have to be rebuilt piece by piece because we've turned it into a very polarized setting. I would say fundamentally that the issue of sort of personal responsibility, family virtue, because we've had such a destruction of the nuclear family, such an implosion of what it means even to be human, to be married, to be in a family. Empirical data, Chris, is really interesting. When two biological parents have a high school education and stay working, the results for their kids are many times better than when those factors aren't present, whether it's everything from delinquency all the way to future prosperity. And we are watching some serious trends of a few well-educated people of all stripes doing a little bit better and a whole bunch of people being left behind, not because we have not enough government, but because we haven't mastered a vision and an understanding of how economics works and the ability to take all these amazing human assets and help them really participate in their own flourishing.
But as you mentioned, we redefine the family unit. We say that a nuclear family is no better than anything else. But if we really wanted to battle poverty, that's what we would do. If parenting's a team sport and half the team isn't showing up, it's hard to win.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, Francis Perkins, Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor in the 1930s, and by the way, we often criticize, and we should, some of FDR's policies, big government, that kind of thing, but they really did much of what they did out of a sincere desire to really help ameliorate 25% unemployment and significant poverty, and I will give them credit for building some infrastructure. But Francis Perkins says, you know, when we give out welfare and we give out help, no immoral person should receive it. Can you imagine anyone saying those words today? Daniel Moynihan, Democratic senator from New York, within half a decade, i.e. by the early 1970s, he was already saying the Great Society is a failure for the urban family. When you divorce bearing children from responsibility, when you divorce money from work, you are actually dehumanizing people. You're actually reducing human dignity rather than helping it. And I'm very in favor of every bit of help and support that people need in distress. And I've been the recipient of all kinds of families and networks coming around us when we've gone through hard times. Right. I've not had the opportunity or need to be on a government system, but I will state to anyone how much I've been helped by so many. So we're not saying no to helping. What we're saying is yes to taking responsibility to participate in your own progress forward.
Well, but you're not only talking about taking responsibility for yourself, you're also talking about helping out neighbors and coming together as an entire community,
yes,
as opposed to this kind of a society that we have where you may live in the same neighborhood for 10 years and not know your neighbors at all.
Well, the combination of internet, social media, technology, global trade has been salutary for the world. It's been wonderful to watch almost 3 billion people lifted out of poverty in my lifetime. So I think we can be grateful for that. At the same time, it's led to further isolation or atomization as people drive into their homes, go online, do their work, do their socializing without necessarily tangibly being right next door to somebody. So recovering a sense of place, recovering a sense of neighborhood, there are some really good signs that people want to find that again. There are movements called slow living. There's even a slow food movement that's rediscovered the crock pot instead of the microwave. But more seriously, I think love for God and love for neighbor are the two great commands in Judaism and Christianity. Most other religions contain similar kinds of things, that one of the signs that you're a spiritual person is that you're caring for others. And one of the ways we care for others is doing our work every day well. And that's one of the things I'm so excited about when I get to work for Made to Flourish, is to help pastors and others understand that neighborly love is often expressed in how we do our work, as well as our charity or our friendship.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you have hope that we can recover from it, and social media is one thing that brings this out, but and also big city living, where you've got a certain amount of anonymity, which I think people also use to amplify animosity because they feel like there's not a personal responsibility or there's not going to be a ramification for just venting on someone that they don't have a personal relationship with.
But there are great signs. Places like Detroit are actually beginning to recover, but they're not recovering because of government policies. They're recovering because of hundreds of churches, nonprofits, businesses, individuals on the ground beginning to take initiative and rebuild houses, rebuild neighborhoods, create health clubs, and teach people about healthy living to deal with obesity. It's one of the great tragedies of our country that poverty and obesity go together because of a lack of access to good food and good education. So I have friends on the ground in Detroit, but they're rebuilding it block by block, person by person. There's wonderful movements toward renewing inner city community and people really wanting to raise their kids in a city community. And community gardens are growing in the middle of New York. So I think it's not like out to the country and away from the city, or that the city is better or worse. It's that people want to find community and purpose in their life, and they're realizing that we need to have a certain integration of family, friendship, leisure, work, rest, and raise our children in that environment. So there are some wonderful signs of life. Hopefully those can overtake the shrillness, the histrionics, the reactions that we're watching right now.
And so how would one go about accelerating those positive outcomes as opposed to riots in the street, people fearing for deportation of their neighbors, fear that they're not going to have reproductive control? I mean,
well, part of what we need to do is articulate. I ask this of people all through the political spectrum, in fact, the religious spectrum as well. What does health look like? What does a good community look like? What vision do you have? We need to articulate a vision of what it looks like, because that's where we're going to find the 50, 60, 70% correlation of concerns and values that can help us work together. Now, on some of those other issues, we have to learn to debate with civility, and sometimes people of principled conservative values are going to lose some battles and maybe win some battles, but it's a battle of persuasion, not insult. So I would say we have to articulate what there looks like. We have to get very local, very practical. I have a friend, he loves to teach about ethics and economics, and he said what the world needs now, and everybody thought he was going to say love, sweet love, and he said is jobs, sweet jobs. You know, when a company moves out of town and ships some jobs overseas, well, we need to negotiate trade deals perhaps. We need to have a fairer playing field. But in fact, someone overseas now has plumbing that didn't have plumbing before. So what we need to ask is not what's wrong with those jobs going overseas, but how do we take those 40 or 400 people now out of a job and turn their skills, their human assets into economic development where we are. And this is, we've had a failure of imagination and a failure of interdisciplinary working together. Now, I'm not excusing some jobs being exported. I'm not excusing other nations' policies, but I'm saying, you know what, we've watched so many people lifted out of poverty because of global trade. We can share in that in American communities as well. The same thing you asked about things like immigration, or you asked things about reproductive rights. Well, that shrillness goes away when you start asking the question of, do you still want a rule of law? Do you still want citizenship to mean something? Is what's growing inside that womb a child? If you ask some questions winsomely, and if you ask people what their highest and most noble aspirations are, you'll find them beginning to move toward some of these principled ideas that we share.
Well, and I do find when we just talk to people as humans that we break down a lot of the barriers, and when we actually strive to understand one another as opposed to combat one another.
That's right.
It does get much easier, but it requires things like conversations and collaboration and a willingness to work together on things and prioritize for the community together, which sounds like that's exactly what you're advocating.
I'm advocating, and I'm hoping that in the efforts that I get to put forward in helping clergy and helping nonprofit leaders and business people talk to each other, that we can really help that begin to go forward.
Right. And so we're in this time of extreme division And it's not just the secular versus the religious. It's not the conservative versus the liberal. We're seeing infighting even within those subcategories. And first of all, it's hard to label anybody anything because we're complex animals.
Yes, we are.
But what are you seeing? I mean, even those rifts that are closer to home that should, in theory, get along versus try to demolish one another, there's a lot of infighting and battles and uncertainty right now. Yeah. How do we bridge that?
Well, I think we bridge it by finding the best in both and realizing that you can forge something new. Donald Trump struck a heart chord, a passion chord. Now, I think there were some parts of that harmony that I don't like, but he struck a chord that the more intellectual conservatives simply had ignored. And what would happen if we really listened deeply to people that share many of our values but may not construct it the same way intellectually? On the other hand, people are a lot smarter than we give them credit for, and they can learn some of the best and highest ways of thinking. But I think we've got to bring affections and intellect and actions together and not have them be so disparate. One of the tragedies of the Bill Clinton era, there were a few good policies enacted and a few bad ones enacted. But one of the tragedies is we separated character and competence. We said, well, what he does in private doesn't really matter. And that has to change. Not that you can't be forgiven, not that you can't admit mistakes and improve, not that we expect perfection, but character really matters. And so the people who deeply care about character were disturbed with both candidates. Absolutely. The people who care about getting something done were willing to overlook aspects of character in order to get their candidate. We've got to heal that dichotomy more than any other one, both within each movement and within each political party as well.
Well, I've seen that in talking to voters out there. They've come to a point where they just believe that politicians are exempt from character kind of investigations, right? It's like, well, they're a politician. We just expect them to be a dirtbag.
Right.
And I disagree with that, and it sounds like you have a different standard as well.
For instance, we had a wonderful CEO of Mozilla forced out of his job because he decided to stand for marriage. We have a gay activist who helped to found PayPal standing with Donald Trump. Both of these have unleashed all kinds of criticism, right? Well, what we need to do is we can disagree with those persons' positions. We have to figure out a way, how do we forge alliances with people that know how, with character, to get things done, even while we argue about other things?
Or how do we just practice focusing on our commonalities or our common desired outcomes, even if they're for different reasons, and work together to make something happen versus beating the bejeebers out of each other with no positive end.
This is the 18th century. Our founding had a lot of religious folks, but our founding had folks that weren't all that religious working together on what they described as natural law, natural values. Most people went to church, or at least professed to go to church, but even the people that weren't very religious shared a sense of timeless, permanent values that we can build a flourishing society on.
And they didn't necessarily need to attack someone because they were religious and didn't feel that they wanted to be, or vice versa. And
they felt free to attack the ideas, and sometimes the person. Let's face it, some of their debates were rather lively too.
And involved canes and sticks sometimes.
But they knew how to debate intellectually and then go out and roll up the sleeves and pass some legislation. And that's what we have to learn how to do again.
Okay. Well, Charlie, we're just about out of time. Okay. What's the best way for people to look you up and find out more about what you're up to, what you believe, and how they can get some of that?
Well, I hope I can be of encouragement. drcharlieself.com is my own website, and then madetoflourish.org. It will give you an idea of what I get to do all day in helping high-capacity folks. And I would encourage them to be in touch with me. I actually do answer my emails. And what do you say we create a thoughtful people of conscience movement together?
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Well, thanks for joining us, Charlie. If you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We appreciate the underwriting they've done for this show over the last, going on the end of the 5th season here. But what they're best known for is their speaker series. And that happens the second Tuesday of each month at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Stearland Road in Mountain View, about 3 minutes from here. And that's actually the reason we were blessed to have Charlie with us in the studio this evening, as he'll be speaking just in a little while over there. And so coming up in December, Nick Adams, founder and executive director of the Foundation for Liberty and American Greatness, which is an organization dedicated to promoting American exceptionalism and combating anti-Americanism worldwide, will be speaking. In January, Dr. Beth Haynes with the Benjamin Rush Institute will be talking about healthcare policy. But if you'd like more details on who's coming and things like start times, which is typically 7 o'clock, you can find out more at theconservativeforum.com. And I just love in closing, when Charlie gets to join us here in the studio, he has such insight and is just a man of character and principle that wants to see society brought together. And I know that most of the time, us conservatives are considered hate-mongering, unemotional kinds of folks. But Charlie really brings to the fore the idea that we do need to work together. We do need to collaborate. And with all the differences that are out there, if we focus on the important things, understanding each other, our priorities, and working toward a common solution, that we can get a lot done. And I am in complete agreement. So look him up on the web. You can Google him. You can go after Dr. Charlie Self as the website. I know he's out on Facebook and things as well. But look him up and be prepared to be enlightened. On that note, I thank you for joining us this evening. This has been The Right Side. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and I look forward to seeing you again in person or on the show sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible with answers to your questions or to catch those flaming darts. Thanks again, and have a great night.